The first moment does not feel like loss. It feels like waiting. A dog watches the door close. The sound is familiar. This has happened before. The dog remains where it is, ears slightly raised, body still. This is not fear. This is expectation. Dogs live through patterns, and patterns create meaning. When you leave, the dog does not think in terms of forever. It thinks in terms of return. Every previous experience has taught it that absence is temporary, so it waits. The body stays relaxed, but the mind is alert. The dog listens for familiar sounds, a key turning, a voice, footsteps approaching. The world narrows into a single focus. Time begins to stretch. Minutes feel longer when there is nothing to anchor them. The dog moves closer to the door, not out of panic, but out of alignment with its expectation. This is where you left. This is where you will return. This belief is not questioned. It is trusted. As time passes, something subtle begins to shift. The dog checks the environment. It walks through familiar spaces, pauses, listens again. The rhythm of waiting changes. It is no longer passive. It becomes active, searching, not for you directly, but for signs of you. A scent, a sound, a trace of presence. This is the beginning of uncertainty. Not yet abandonment, but the first crack in expectation. The dog returns to the door. It sits, it stands, it lies down. These movements are not random. They are attempts to regulate internal tension. The mind is beginning to ask a question it cannot fully understand. Why has the pattern not completed? Still, the belief remains. You will come back. This is the foundation of the bond. As the waiting continues, the emotional state begins to change. The dog becomes more alert to small sounds. A distant noise may trigger a sudden rise in attention. The body lifts, ears forward, heart ready. Then nothing happens. The sound fades, and with it, a small piece of certainty. This repeated cycle begins to wear on the system. Hope rises, hope falls, again and again, each time leaving a slightly deeper imprint. The dog may begin to vocalize. Soft at first, a whine, a low sound that is not meant to call loudly, but to express discomfort. This is not a request, it is a release. Emotion that cannot be resolved internally begins to move outward. The space feels different now, not because anything has changed physically, but because the absence has taken on meaning. The dog starts to feel alone, and loneliness is not just the absence of company, it is the absence of connection. A dog does not simply miss a person. It misses the shared rhythm, the presence that gives structure to its world. Without that presence, the environment feels incomplete. As more time passes, behavior begins to shift further. The dog may pace, moving from one area to another without clear purpose. This is not restlessness in the usual sense. It is searching without direction. The mind is trying to resolve something it cannot solve. Where are you? Why has the pattern broken? The dog does not have the language to answer these questions, so it moves, again and again, trying to find resolution through action. At some point, energy begins to drop, not because the feeling is gone, but because the system cannot sustain that level of tension. The dog slows down. It may lie down, but not in comfort. In exhaustion, the body rests, but the mind does not. There is a quiet state that follows, a stillness that is different from calm. This is where the feeling deepens. The dog is no longer actively searching.
Hi, buddy.
It is waiting again.
I missed you too.
But this waiting feels different, less certain, more fragile. The belief that you will return is still there, but it is no longer as strong. And this is where the experience of abandonment begins to take shape. Not as a clear thought, but as a shift in emotional foundation. Trust becomes unstable, and when trust becomes unstable, behavior reflects
again.
it. If this pattern repeats,
Don't you dare
if the dog
feed him from
experiences
the
extended
table,
absence
honey.
again and again, without clear resolution, the psychological impact grows. The dog may begin to anticipate loss even when you are still present. This is one of the most important changes. The feeling of abandonment does not only exist in absence, it begins to appear in presence. You may notice the dog becoming more attached when you are around, following more closely, watching more carefully, reacting more strongly to small signs that you might leave. This is not increased affection, it is increased anxiety. The dog is trying to prevent the next separation, trying to hold on to connection before it disappears again. At the same time, There may be moments of withdrawal. This may seem contradictory, closeness and distance, but both come from the same source. Uncertainty. The dog does not know how to stabilize the bond, so it moves between seeking and protecting. Sometimes it comes closer, sometimes it pulls away. Both are attempts to manage the same feeling. Over time, this can shape the dog's entire emotional pattern. Confidence decreases. Exploration becomes limited. The world feels less secure because the one constant that defines safety has become unpredictable. This is the core of abandonment from a dog's perspective. Not just being left alone, but losing the reliability of return. The pattern that once created trust is no longer consistent. And without consistency, the mind cannot rest. Even when you come back, the reaction may change. At first, there is relief, excitement, movement, but beneath that, something else begins to form. A hesitation, a question. Will you leave again? This question is not spoken, but it exists in behavior, in how the dog watches you, in how it responds to your movements, in how it stays close, even when it should feel relaxed. The bond is still there, but it is no longer effortless. It requires reassurance, repeated, consistent, patient reassurance. Because once a dog begins to feel abandoned, the experience does not disappear immediately when you return. It lingers in memory, in expectation, in the way the dog approaches connection. And yet, there is something important to understand. A dog does not hold resentment the way humans do. It does not judge. It does not assign blame. What it feels is simpler and deeper. It feels the change in connection, and it adapts, always trying to restore balance, always trying to find stability again. If that stability returns consistently, if the pattern becomes reliable again, the dog slowly rebuilds trust. Not all at once, but gradually, through repetition, through presence, through the quiet assurance that absence is not permanent. But if inconsistency continues, the pattern strengthens. The feeling of abandonment becomes part of the dog's emotional structure, and that affects everything, from behavior to health, from interaction to rest, because the mind and body are not separate. What the dog feels shapes how it lives, and how it lives shapes how it feels. In the end, abandonment for a dog is not defined by a single moment. It is defined by a pattern of broken expectation, a pattern of absence without clear return, a pattern that slowly reshapes trust. But the opposite is also true. Connection is also a pattern. Presence is a pattern. Reliability is a pattern. And through these patterns, a dog finds its way back to balance, back to trust, back to the quiet certainty that it is not alone, even when the door closes, even when the room becomes silent, even when time stretches and the world feels still. Because what matters most is not the absence itself, but what the absence means, and what follows after. As time continues, the emotional weight does not stay in one place. It spreads. What once existed only in the moment of separation begins to shape everything else. This is where the deeper psychology reveals itself. The dog no longer experiences absence as a single event. It begins to anticipate it. Even when you are still present, small signals start to trigger internal reactions. A change in your tone, the sound of keys, the movement toward the door. These are no longer neutral actions. They become warnings. The dog watches more closely now. Its eyes follow every movement with quiet intensity. Not out of curiosity, but out of concern. The body may remain still, but the mind is already preparing. This is the beginning of anticipatory anxiety. Before you even leave, the dog is already feeling the absence, and this changes the nature of your time together. Moments that should feel relaxed begin to carry tension. The dog may stay closer than before, pressing itself near you, trying to maintain contact for as long as possible. This is not simple affection. It is an attempt to delay what it fears is coming. At the same time, another pattern may emerge. Avoidance. In some cases, the dog may appear less engaged as you prepare to leave. It may turn away, lie down, or act as if it is not paying attention. This is not indifference. It is protection. If connection leads to loss, then reducing connection becomes a way to reduce pain. These two responses can exist together, clinging and withdrawal, both shaped by the same experience, both trying to manage the same uncertainty. Over repeated cycles, this internal conflict becomes more pronounced. The dog struggles to find a stable emotional position, Should it stay close or stay distant? Should it trust or protect itself? There is no clear answer, so behavior becomes inconsistent. And this inconsistency is often misunderstood. From the outside, it may look like the dog is unpredictable, but in reality, it is responding to a pattern that feels unpredictable to it. The world has lost its reliability, and the dog is trying to adapt. Another change appears in how the dog handles time alone. In the early stage, waiting is active. The dog listens, searches, hopes. But as the experience repeats without clear resolution, waiting begins to lose its structure. The dog may stop going to the door as often, stop checking as frequently, not because it no longer cares, but because the effort no longer feels effective. This is where emotional fatigue begins. The system reduces activity to conserve energy. Hope becomes quieter, more internal, less expressed through movement. The dog may lie in one place for longer periods, not fully resting, but not actively searching either. This state can be mistaken for calm, but it is not the same. It is a form of resignation, not complete, but emerging. And this is one of the most important turning points, because once the dog begins to feel that its actions do not change the outcome, its behavior shifts from engagement to endurance. It no longer tries to influence the situation, it simply goes through it. This affects not only moments of absence, but moments of presence as well. The dog may respond less enthusiastically when you return, still happy, still relieved, but with a layer of restraint, as if it is holding something back. This is not because the bond has weakened, it is because the expectation has changed. The dog is no longer fully certain that the connection will remain, so it adjusts, protecting itself in small, almost invisible ways. There may also be changes in how the dog interacts with its environment. Objects that once held interest may now be ignored. Exploration becomes limited. The world feels less inviting, because the emotional foundation that supported curiosity has been disrupted. Security allows exploration. Uncertainty reduces it. The dog's focus narrows, not out of choice, but out of necessity. Another layer appears in physical expression. The body begins to carry the emotional state more clearly. Posture may become slightly lowered, movements less confident, energy more uneven. These are not dramatic changes, but they are consistent, and consistency is what gives them meaning. One of the most subtle but powerful shifts is in trust recovery. When you return, the dog wants to reconnect, but the process takes longer. It may approach, then pause, lean in, then step back, as if testing the moment, as if asking a question without words. Are you staying? This question becomes part of the interaction, not consciously, but behaviorally, and until it is answered repeatedly through consistent experience, it remains. The dog needs proof, not once, but many times, that the pattern has changed. That absence is followed by return. That connection is stable again. Only then does the mind begin to relax. Only then does the body follow. And yet, this process is delicate. Because rebuilding trust takes longer than losing it. It requires patience, consistency, awareness. Every small action contributes to the pattern. Every departure, every return, every moment of presence, together they shape the dog's understanding of its world. This is why abandonment is not just about being left alone. It is about the meaning attached to that experience. If absence is predictable and followed by reliable return, the dog adapts without deep distress. But if absence feels uncertain, inconsistent, or prolonged beyond expectation, it changes the emotional structure, and that change reaches far beyond a single moment. It touches identity, security, connection, the way the dog experiences life itself. But there is also something hopeful within this, because just as patterns of absence can shape the mind, patterns of presence can reshape it, slowly, gently, over time. A consistent return, a calm departure, a stable rhythm. These rebuild what was shaken, not instantly, but steadily. The dog begins to trust again, to relax again, to engage with the world again. Because at its core, a dog is always seeking balance, always moving toward connection, always ready to trust when given a reason. And that reason is not found in words. It is found in patterns, in actions repeated with care, in presence that feels reliable, in a bond that does not break under uncertainty. So even if the dog has felt abandoned, even if the experience has shaped its behavior, the story is not fixed. It continues, changing with each new experience, each new moment of consistency, each new sign that connection remains. And in that ongoing story, there is always the possibility of restoration. Not perfect, not immediate, but real. Because the same sensitivity that allows a dog to feel lost deeply also allows it to feel safety when it returns. And that is where healing begins. Quietly, patiently, through presence that stays. And then, there is a moment that feels almost invisible from the outside, but deeply important within. A moment when the dog begins to change, not just in behavior, but in how it understands connection itself. At this stage, the experience of abandonment is no longer tied to a single event. It has become part of the dog's internal world, something it carries, even in quiet moments, even when nothing is happening, even when you are sitting right beside it. This is where the psychology becomes more complex. The dog is no longer simply reacting, it is anticipating, interpreting, and adjusting continuously. One of the clearest signs is in how the dog watches you when everything seems normal. You may be sitting calmly, doing nothing unusual, but the dog's eyes return to you again and again. Not with excitement, not with playfulness. With monitoring, this is not curiosity. It is vigilance. The dog is no longer fully at ease in the presence of connection. It feels the need to track it, to ensure it does not disappear unexpectedly. This quiet watching is often mistaken for loyalty, but it is something deeper. It is the mind trying to maintain control over something that once felt certain. Another change appears in how the dog handles distance. Even small separations can trigger a reaction. If you move to another room, close a door, or step out of sight, the dog may follow more quickly than before, or it may become still, listening carefully, waiting for confirmation that you are still there. Distance has taken on new meaning. It is no longer neutral, it is a signal, and the dog responds accordingly. There may also be a shift in how the dog expresses comfort. Before, comfort came easily. The dog could rest deeply, sleep fully, relax without concern. But now, comfort becomes conditional. The dog relaxes, but lightly. It rests, but with awareness, always leaving a part of itself alert, as if it cannot fully let go. This partial relaxation is one of the strongest indicators that the emotional system has changed, because true rest requires trust, and trust has been disrupted. Another subtle but powerful sign is in how the dog responds after reunion. At first, the reaction may still appear joyful. Movement, energy, sound, but if you look closely, there is a layer beneath it, a need for reassurance that continues even after you have returned. The dog may stay close longer than before, check on you more frequently, follow you from room to room without clear reason. This is not just happiness, it is confirmation seeking. The dog is trying to stabilize the connection again, trying to rebuild the sense of certainty that was lost. Over time, if this pattern continues, the dog may develop what appears to be emotional contradiction. Moments of strong attachment followed by sudden withdrawal, approach followed by hesitation, engagement followed by stillness. These are not random changes. They are expressions of an internal conflict, the desire to connect, and the fear of losing that connection again. Both exist at the same time, and the dog moves between them, searching for balance. There is also a deeper layer that often goes unnoticed. The change in how the dog experiences itself. When connection is stable, the dog moves through the world with confidence. It knows where it belongs. It knows what to expect. But when that stability is disrupted, identity becomes less certain. The dog may appear less sure in its movements, less decisive in its actions, as if it is no longer anchored in the same way. This is not just emotional, it is structural. Because connection is not only about relationship, it is about orientation. It tells the dog how to exist within its environment. And when that is shaken, everything shifts slightly, even if it is not immediately visible. But there is something important to understand here. This state is not permanent. It may feel deep, it may feel complex, but it is still responsive to change. Because the same mind that adapted to uncertainty can adapt to stability again. The key lies in consistency, not intensity, not occasional reassurance, but steady, predictable patterns that rebuild trust over time. A calm departure that does not carry tension. A reliable return that does not feel uncertain. A presence that remains stable, even when the dog is watching closely. These small, repeated actions begin to reshape the internal experience. Slowly, the dog starts to relax again. The monitoring becomes less frequent. The need for constant proximity softens. The body begins to rest more deeply. The mind begins to release its vigilance. Not all at once, but step by step. Because healing, like loss, is a process. And it follows the same path, through repetition, through experience, through patterns that create meaning. If those patterns become reliable again, something shifts. The dog begins to trust not just the moment, but the future. And when that happens, the emotional weight begins to lift. The world becomes open again. Curiosity returns. Engagement returns. The quiet tension fades. And in its place, something familiar reappears. A sense of safety, a sense of belonging, a sense that connection is not something that disappears without warning, but something that remains, even when you are not in the room, even when the door is closed, even when time stretches and silence fills the space. Because what the dog learns, over time, is this. Absence does not mean loss. Separation does not mean abandonment. And connection, when it is stable, does not need to be constantly questioned. This understanding does not come from words. It comes from experience, from patterns repeated until they become truth. And once that truth is restored, the dog no longer needs to watch so closely, no longer needs to hold itself back, no longer needs to live between approach and withdrawal. It can simply be present, calm, certain. And in that certainty, the bond becomes stronger than before. Not because it was never broken, but because it was rebuilt, with awareness, with patience, with a deeper understanding of what the dog has been feeling all along. And in the end, everything comes down to something very simple. Not what the dog went through, but what it needed all along. Because behind every sign, every change, every quiet shift in behavior, there was always one central truth. The need for certainty, the need to feel that connection does not disappear without reason. The need to trust that when something ends, it will begin again. When a dog feels abandoned, it is not just reacting to being alone, it is reacting to a break in meaning. The pattern that once defined safety no longer holds. And without that pattern, the world becomes harder to understand. But here is where everything changes. Because the same way that meaning was broken, it can be rebuilt. Not through words, not through explanation, but through experience. Through what the dog sees happen again and again. This is where your role becomes powerful. Not in a dramatic way, but in a consistent one. Every time you leave, the way you leave matters. Every time you return, the way you return matters. Every moment you share when nothing is wrong matters. Because these moments form the pattern, and the pattern forms the dog's understanding of its world. If you leave with tension, the dog feels it. If you return unpredictably, the dog remembers it. If your presence changes from one moment to another, the dog tries to adapt. But if your actions become steady, calm, and reliable, something begins to shift. Slowly at first, almost unnoticeable, the dog starts to wait differently, not with urgency, not with confusion, but with quiet confidence. The space you leave behind no longer feels uncertain. It feels temporary. And that difference changes everything. You may notice that the dog no longer watches you as closely when you prepare to leave. The eyes soften, the body remains more relaxed. There is still awareness, but it is no longer filled with tension. This is trust returning. Not because you told the dog everything is fine, but because you showed it, again and again. Over time, you may also see that when you come back, the reaction becomes balanced. Not overwhelming, not restrained, just natural. The dog greets you, then settles. It does not need to hold on tightly. It does not need to confirm repeatedly, because it already knows you came back, and you will again. Even in your absence, the dog begins to rest more deeply. Sleep becomes fuller. Movement becomes lighter. Curiosity slowly returns. The world opens again, not all at once, but steadily, because the emotional foundation has been repaired. And when that foundation is stable, everything built on top of it becomes stable as well. Behavior, energy, connection, all of it aligns again. This is the quiet transformation that follows understanding. Not a sudden change, but a gradual return to balance, and it begins with something very small. The The decision to be consistent, to recognize that what feels ordinary to you may carry deep meaning for your dog, that every departure is a message, every return is a message, every moment of presence is a message, and those messages, repeated over time, become true.
Yes,
Your dog does not need perfection. It does not need you to never leave. It needs you to be predictable, to be steady, to be someone it can understand. Because understanding creates safety, and safety allows the dog to relax into connection again, to trust without hesitation, to rest without alertness, to exist without constantly preparing for loss. And when that happens, something beautiful appears. Not just relief, but a deeper bond. A connection that has been tested, adjusted, and rebuilt with awareness. One that carries not only affection, but stability. Not only presence, but reliability. And in that connection, the dog no longer feels abandoned, even when it is alone. Because it has learned something stronger than absence. It has learned that connection continues, that it does not vanish, that it returns. And that understanding stays with it, quietly, patiently, guiding how it feels, how it waits, how it trusts, long after the door closes, long after the room becomes silent, long after time begins to stretch again. Because now, the silence is different. It is no longer filled with uncertainty. It is filled with expectation, a calm, steady expectation that does not need to question itself. And that is the difference between a dog that feels abandoned and a dog that feels secure. Not the absence itself, but the meaning behind it and the pattern that follows.